you so much, Casey, everybody here and everybody watching this a little bit later because you couldn't make it. Why aren't you here? You're missing out. Just wanted to welcome you all to this call. I'm still gonna rock it no matter what, so let's go. The topic of self-care and burnout prevention are just under a bigger umbrella for me personally, and I believe in the importance of self-compassion. And so whether there is different methods of self-care out there, whether there are different methods of burnout prevention out there, I personally believe that the umbrella of it all, the whole point of it all is to practice self-compassion. And the reason why I think that self-compassion is so important is because I would love to acknowledge all of you and all of us here right now as just human beings in general, and not just type 1 diabetics or not just employees or maybe even type 2 diabetics out there, but as human beings in general who seem to just happen to experience, sometimes the sucky moments and sometimes the greater moments of having diabetes in our lives. And so as we look at ourselves as humans, it's, I think, so easy to just forget the humanness beneath the beast mode, as I always call it, which means that through society, through life, through time in the world, I think it's really easy to get caught up in high performance, in perfectionism, in whatever it is that we do. So whether we are at work or whether it's type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, it's always about, what number do we have? What A1C do we have? How does our day look? How does our self-care look? And so no matter what it is in life, especially if you do consider yourself a perfectionist, it's so easy to fall into that trap of comparing ourselves to our best self and also comparing ourselves to others. And so I think that self-compassion just brings us back to center. I think that self-compassion brings us back to being grounded. And how I came to this, I don't want to say conclusion, but this belief system that I have is because I learned it the hard way. When I was a kid, I grew up in South Korea. And so I don't want to, say that I am so Asian that XYZ, but I grew up in a culture where excellence and perfectionism was the bottom line. It was the standard for almost everybody. A B plus, of course, is like, what is that? You come home with an A, it's about where's the A plus? I come home with an A plus, it's always where's the extra credit? When I came to America and in high school, I was inducted into the honor society. My mom, everybody else, they had flowers in their hands from their parents. My mom just stood there empty-handed. And I also stood there empty-handed because my mom was kind of like, of course you got into the honor society. Of course you got into a Division I great university called Penn State. And so throughout life, it was always, of course, it was always, being perfect, being excellent was just, there was no reward for anything. It was just what was always expected of me. When I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, it was as if, I swear to God, y'all, like I chase A1Cs as if I'm chasing the perfect GPA. Like, am I really chasing a 4.0 A1C? I don't know. But I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes my freshman year of college. It was spring semester. It was right after spring break. As I was going into spring break, before I went back home, I was in the dorm rooms and I experienced thirst. Your girl was thirsty, and so thirsty that I would just take a shower. And as I was taking a shower, I would just like drink the water that comes out of the shower head. At night, I couldn't sleep because I kept having to go to the bathroom. And I noticed that no matter how much lotion I put on my skin, it was always just cracking dry. I was also losing a lot of weight. And my friends used to say, man, you look good lately, Jiggy. Like freshman 15, what's that? Like you losing weight out here. But ultimately, I learned why that was happening. When I was back home in New York, visiting my mom during spring break, my mom was a nurse. And so I told her all these things that I was experiencing. And she would say, your dad has type 2 diabetes. So go get checked for diabetes when you get back to school. Surely enough, I go to the student medical center and okay, like too much information, but whatever. So you know how you have to like pee in a cup? So I peed in the cup and then I dropped it. So the wait was even so much longer to find out what was going on with me. And about an hour or two later, the doctor comes in and he says, yep, you have a sugar problem. And I don't do well with ambiguity. I don't do well with vagueness. So I ask, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? He says, you have type 1 diabetes. And here's the difference between type 1 and type 2. I called my mom crying on the phone from that same office at that very moment. And my mom started to yell at me. She said, what are you doing away in college? You're so irresponsible. So that just goes to show you, long story short, basically, I had zero family support. I also had no friend support in terms of, I mean, what are they going to do besides asking me, are you okay? Because at the time, Instagram wasn't really a thing. Facebook was all right, but I was so new to the diabetes space. And also I didn't know there was Facebook groups. I didn't know there were these JDRF walks. I didn't know anything. Plus I went to Penn State. There are so many students there, and I have never met somebody who had any sort of diabetes whatsoever. So I took on the journey extremely alone. The other reason why I mentioned my childhood growing up with the expectations and standards of excellence is that there was zero celebration of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. And by that, I mean, whenever I was experiencing certain kind of emotion, I wasn't allowed to. Or if I was, they just kind of left me alone. They would always say, oh, here she goes again. Let's just wait till she's done crying. And so growing up, I have been taught that emotions and experiencing emotions, usually for me, it was anger. So then I'm told that I have a temper, that I'm the black sheep of the family. Why don't I know how to behave? But if I was crying, they would just call me sensitive and emotional. And so I was taught that basically emotions are weakness. Emotions aren't celebrated. Emotions are a distraction from excellence. So basically, that's how I lived all of my life. I ignored all of the signs of burnout. I ignored all of the signs of misery. I ignored all of the signs, even if it was literally happening then and there for me. This is the part where I will also share a trigger warning. My story does include self-harm. So sophomore year of college comes, and by that time, I'm diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, right? But also, my mom is diagnosed with cancer. Another thing is that right before college ever even happened, I lost my apartment to fire. And also, my mom had survived a heart attack and had to have an emergency surgery. So, because I don't have any emotional intelligence, mental health is not a thing for me. I go into college already traumatized, experiencing trauma. I go into college needing to be healed, but not knowing what that is. At the time, therapy was like for those who have something wrong with them. There was that whole stigma. I think that it might still exist, but it's getting better, I think. So I never saw help. I never told anybody what I was really experiencing. I continued to experience a lot of anger, temper, crying here and there, depression. And so sophomore year comes, and one day comes a really hard day in my dorm room. And so I'm just curious. I'm just curious about what could and couldn't happen. I started thinking about different possibilities. I also grew up having suicidal thoughts, but just kind of thinking about it, but never really going forth with it. So on a bad day on during my sophomore year of college in my dorm room, I was alone. My roommate was gone. I don't know what it was. It wasn't even movies that I watched or anything, but I looked at my diabetes supplies and something told me, take a lot of insulin. A lot of insulin. I would like to pinpoint that I have no idea where this idea even came from. I've never seen it in a movie, so I don't know why, but it was in front of me. It was available to me. And so I used it as a tool. And I think that when it comes to diabetes management, we are our own heroes in that we look at these tools and we choose to live. We choose to save our own lives every single day. These tools, we have the choice to help us live or help us get to a different side. So I went forth with taking a lot of insulin. Usually that's where I stop my story. I will also let you know that I didn't start sharing that story until the end of 2019. The reason why I waited so long was because one, I grew up being told to never be a burden to anybody else. So I always kept that story to myself. I never told anybody. I hinted it to my friends around me through a rap song because I used to make music at the time, but I never came out with it until 2019. And the reason why I actually decided to start sharing the story in 2019 was because one day in a type 1 diabetes Facebook page, I saw a woman post about her husband who has type 1 diabetes. And she shared that he had attempted suicide overdosing on insulin the night before. And thankfully, I think found him. She walked into the room and found him on the floor and took him to the hospital. At the time, what I heard was that he was okay. And that really woke me up and told me, mental health is such a huge aspect of living life with chronic illness. And no matter how many times per year people say there's going to be a new bionic pancreas coming out next year, or, oh, have you tried cinnamon? There are these cinnamon pills. It's like, you can try to, give us hope all you want to, but at the end of the day, I think sustainability is so important. I think that longevity is so important because type 1 diabetes is just such a marathon. And no matter how many promises there might be out there, we just don't know when it's going to end. I'm sure, especially with also type 2 diabetes as well. It's about complications, and it does affect us mentally. It does crush our spirits sometimes. It does affect us emotionally as well. So rather than honing in on the beast mode that we have, honing in on, I ain't got time for that today. I got to just get over it. I just got to push through it. I'll get over it later. Maybe I'll just take a bath later. Self-care is more than just taking baths. Self-care is more than just a day off. So that's why I keep coming back to self-compassion. And life with chronic illness is so freaking exhausting. Wasn't there a study done that says like type 1 diabetics makes this many times more decisions per day than regular people without type 1 diabetes? So with that said, keeping that in mind, the brain actually can only make so many decisions per day. The brain can actually only hold so many information per day. And that's why information fatigue is a real thing. So I encourage all of us to be much more gentle with ourselves. And that's why I keep coming back to self-compassion. Self-compassion doesn't always have to look like self-care. Self-compassion doesn't always have to look like Zen and yoga and hiking with your girls or whatever it is that you do. But maybe self-compassion can look like actually laughing more. Maybe self-compassion can look like inner dialogue with ourselves. Maybe self-compassion can look like reaching out to community for compassion from other people, from empathy from one another people. And I think that what's so dope about our community is that, man, we are warriors, we're gangsters, we're badasses, and we are just such empathetic people. I think that is so powerful about our community. And so I know that, be self-compassionate is so vague, but it's also because I believe that self-compassion is personalized. I think that self-care and mental health is not just something that you repost, but I think that is something that you create self-awareness around. And so sometimes something might work, sometimes something might not work. But what I always tell my clients is pay attention to what's working and what's not working. And then let's try it again. What does self-compassion look like for you? We can always be inspired by others, but that doesn't always mean that there's something wrong with us if it doesn't work for us. So again, the reflection question, I hope you have pen and paper, is what works for you and what isn't working for you, and what help can you receive and what help can you seek? There are so many influencers, therapists in our community as well. There are coaches. There are just fun people, community as well. Meetups are tough right now, but if we can continue to communicate and create these dialogues, have these conversations, I think that empathy can just go such a long way. Don't believe that hype about keep things to yourself, don't be a burden. That's a lie. That's a lie. The biggest lie is like people are like, the secret to success is XYZ. It's like, man, everybody knows what the secret to success is. It's all the same. Work hard, be consistent, be committed. Everybody knows that. That's not the problem here. The problem is we don't know how to take a break. We don't know how to be self-compassionate. And so let's prioritize that and let's see how that works.
Casey, this is Debbie. I'm actually in my car, so I'm not gonna. I have you on my laptop in the car, so I'm not gonna turn my camera on. But this was amazing. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm like in shock right now because I was just telling Casey that I was in a car accident the other day. So please drive safe.
No, I am the passenger. Don't worry about.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely the passenger. My husband's here listening. He's learned a lot too. He's British, so he knows a lot about not, processing emotion.
I see.
Yeah, so it was very impactful. I appreciate your story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I second what Debbie said. I'm a therapist myself, and that is something that I make a practice for myself. Like you said, it's not just like bubble bath, but that if that is your jam, by all means, do it more. But definitely just checking in with ourselves, like you're saying, and taking the time to really connect with ourselves, and that tenderness that we're not taught to practice. And that is definitely, I see with the folks that I work cross-culturally, where it is like, very much make us proud. I mean, personally for me, I'm biracial. I'm Mexican and European. Those are my descents. So there is this like push and pull and finding what works for you. So I definitely agree with what you're saying, Jiggy, like to really focus on how can I be tender? How can I be kind to myself? And it is really hard for us when that's not something that we're asked growing up, or when our emotional health and communicating is not normalized in our home environment. So that can make it feel weird and tough, or how I hear folks tell me all the time, it feels like yucky, me being nice to myself, because we're not used to that. So I do really appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miss Mary. Yeah, my girlfriend is actually Mexican as well, and she's actually a professional fighter. So there's this term that people use, like you fight like a Mexican, and basically that's just like they just head down, tunnel vision, just go go go. And so this has been one of the toughest things for us to communicate and learn about each other throughout our relationship. Obviously, I had to also learn it all the hard way with my Asian culture, but also just like inspiring her and also her family, like, hey, there's this thing called experiencing emotion, and it doesn't distract you from your goals.
Yeah,
so let's try
and it's
that.
not weakness, and it's not. I think a lot of folks think like happiness is a good emotion, or like calm is good, but oh, don't ever be mad, or don't ever have rage, or don't ever be sad, or like those are all bad things. And I always tell folks, like, no emotion is bad. No emotion is bad. It's how we respond to the emotion, right? There's healthy, safe ways, and there's things that could harm us if we don't. So yeah.
Emotions are definitely like, I think it has a lot to do with the angle that everybody views emotions, because I think that emotions are information. Emotion is energy in motion, as people say. And so emotions, when you have anger, it's like you have the anger, but are you going to like punch someone, or are you going to actually look inward and see where does this anger rise from? Or if you have sadness, where does this rise from? And also exploring what are my needs and how can that be filled? And then there are so many different ways to explore self-care, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. Like you said, like a bath is great. I hear baths are great. It's not my jam. Bubbles are like whatever to me. It just gets really hot. But some people prefer hiking. I hate hiking. But
I'm the opposite. I'm all about being in nature and like taking my shoes off and like touching the earth. I'm all about that.
But yeah, self-compassion can also look like, if you're spiritual, there's just getting it just grounded in faith, or just a lot of self, inner dialogue, talking nicer to ourselves, or like communicating that with our friends and partners to hold us accountable in the way that we talk to ourselves. There's so many ways to explore self-care.
Yeah, and even like the way that you highlighted that sense that we all have of being a burden when
Mm.
our loved ones want to help us.
Mhm.
And sometimes when they can't is because they're dealing with their own stuff, or they're stuck in their own thing that they don't know how to hold space for ours.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that we're burdens. That just means that we need to find safe and good people, um,
Yes.
maybe in new environments. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that bandwidth awareness, knowing that what our capacity and our bandwidth are. Self-awareness is like the anchor to everything. I always say.
Yeah.
The answers are always in self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
This is Virginia. I had trouble getting into the session. It kept kicking me out. So finally, I kept thinking, this Jiggy person sounds interesting. I need to try and figure out how to get on the program. So I'm glad I did. I am in my 60s, early 60s. I've been diabetic since type 2 had type 2 gestational diabetes in my 30s for 2 pregnancies, and then developed type 2 diabetes before I turned 40, and then have been on insulin as well as oral medications since 2009. So I hear a lot of what you're saying, and it has been a big adjustment. It's kind of hard to communicate it sometimes to people. I work as a program manager, and I have done diabetes education, facilitated a diabetes support group, and received funding to expand some of my programming. And so now we're doing nutrition and physical education for individuals trying to manage chronic disease, including diabetes. And my staff is so young.
Mm.
And thankfully, none of them have type 2 or type 1 diabetes. So it's kind of hard to kind of really get them to understand that it's going to take a lot more than just telling them which groceries to buy and to move more. There is that mental health aspect to it that is so important. So I have them as I hire the staff for this program to participate in mental health first aid. So they kind of get a little bit of, it's not dealing exactly with diabetes, and it's more dealing with individuals with like schizophrenia or, bipolar disorder or some others, but still to be more, have more empathy and more concern. I let them know when we do our icebreaker, when a new staff person starts, I remind them I can get low blood sugar, and these are the things to look for, and this is what we can do, so that they're familiar with it. And so yeah, it's you're talking about all the decision making that has to be done. And that's one thing I do. I've been invited to speak to women who are pregnant through one of the health plans in our area in Texas next month, no, in November, about gestational diabetes and um, diabetes in general, because that was kind of my lead. And I didn't do the things the doctor said that I needed to do. I didn't lose the weight. I got pregnant again. I did have a miscarriage with my last pregnancy. Um, just kind of letting them know there's so much more you have to do once you get the diagnosis. I encourage you to take all the steps you can to delay or prevent the onset of the diabetes as long as possible, so that you don't have to find yourself, I have to check my blood sugar and take my meds in the morning before I even, as soon as I get up. I can't have a meal out. I have to make sure I'm always carrying insulin and needles because I use the insulin pens. I still have to take, a little thing with medications, all the meds that I have to take. And then last year I was diagnosed with breast cancer on top of that.
Mm.
And so now I'm having to take hormone pills as part of my, I'm cancer free now, but on top of that, all the follow-up care. And it is a challenge. It is a challenge. I feel for you because you're so young and had to go through that at such a young age. I was in my late 30s before that became an issue for me. And so I applaud you and I encourage you. And I'm glad that, how am I going to word this? I'm glad that you figured out that angle about mental health and that you do have to give yourself a break. You do have to be understanding and compassionate to yourself.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing, Miss Virginia. I really appreciate just your transparency and your strength, and also trusting us for everything that you shared with us. Yeah, there's diabetes, and then there are so many other things in life. Well, that's life in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was young, but you know, I don't think there's ever a convenient time to experience the hardships of life in the first place. So I commend you for your perseverance and strength and where you are now today. And in terms of the mental health first aid, I'm a mental health first aid certified too. And what I really appreciated about the certification program is they actually show us how to ask which questions to create awareness around what's happening. And so asking questions is a huge part of compassion and empathy. And I love that you're encouraging, you're letting your team know what your needs are, but also now they know which questions to ask you or anybody else. So awareness, I think, is really key. And thank you again for sharing.
You're welcome. I'm glad I was persistent about getting on.
All right, Jiggy, is there anything else you'd want to share with us?
Vulnerability is dope.
Yes.
As my shirt.
Yes. How can we get your shirt?
You can't because I'm sold out. But
No.
I have a few cool compassion t-shirts left. You can go to jiggyyoon.com, jiggyyoon.bigcartel.com,
Okay.
or just jiggyyoon.com. But other than that, really appreciative of everybody being here. And thank you so much to Diversity in Diabetes for having me.